Way to make it like you know how to show up right on time. Chris, just testing real quick. Can you hear us?
Testing.
All right, that's the man in the background, Chris. How you doing? Good to see you.
Good. And we're shooting for what, about 10, 15 minutes? Or?
Yeah, 15, 20 minutes. We've got a half an hour before the next guest, so we can talk as long as you like.
Sounds good.
So, Mr. Aldrich, can I call you that?
Brendan.
Brendan. You are from Invoke Learning?
Yes.
You're here at Educause. You've actually been running around podcasting yourself, I think. Did you?
Yes.
You pulled it off or no?
I am now the host of the Higher Edge.
Okay.
A higher ed podcast about the voices of higher education.
Okay. So I know you and I connected on this like a week or so ago.
Right.
You've got 8 or 10 episodes out right now.
About 9 or 10 episodes now.
Okay. So tell us what's the. I want to start there. What is the focus, the point of the podcast? Tell me like some of the guests that you've had on.
I actually spent about 10 years working in higher education before forming Invoke Learning. So I was at City Colleges of Chicago. I became the chief data officer for Ivy Tech, the statewide community college in Indiana, and then was even the chief data officer for the California State University system.
Okay.
But I always took a very grassroots approach to the work that I did. So I was always out at the campuses. I was talking to all these different groups of people and realized that I had a perspective and a better understanding of sort of what everybody did and how that contributed to higher education than many other people did whose roles were maybe a little bit more focused.
Mm-hmm.
So with the podcast, I wanted to bring that experience to anybody who wanted to listen. Let's bring in college presidents and chancellors and CIOs and institutional researchers and directors of advancement and really have a chance to spend 20 or 30 minutes with each of these people and learn more about them and who they are and how their work contributes to supporting students in higher education.
100%. So who's been your favorite guest so far? Actually, you were telling me about one like last
honestly, we had a
Thursday.
recent episode that came out with Olivia Q. Fickus, who is the chief data officer at Vanderbilt University, which was great because, among other things, Vanderbilt University is where all of the mRNA research back in the 90s started that wound up becoming the basis for many of the COVID vaccines during the pandemic.
Wow.
And Olivia herself started her career in international development, actually working in Ukraine. And we talk a little bit about that during the episode as well. So I think overall, just a great episode that not only helped develop a better understanding of her role as a chief data officer, but also was able to bring in some current events and some perspectives and topics on things that are happening right now.
Awesome. Fantastic. So what, if you're going to get something out of Educause, actually, I want to hear the perspective. Like, you've been in this business forever, and you've been to Educause multiple times. What's this year like compared to, obviously, the last couple of years have been nothing, but does it feel like there's something new? Is there a new energy here? Is there like a restart, or is this like we've picked up where we've left off?
I think the momentum is building. Obviously, during the pandemic, we couldn't really do everything that we used to when it came to the annual conference and bringing. There were sometimes 8,000 or 9,000 people that would come to an Educause conference.
And what's this year, like 3,000?
No. Well, actually, last year was the first year Educause came back after the pandemic, and it was a smaller, more intimate Educause involving maybe 2,000 or 3,000 people.
Okay.
This year, I believe there's about 5,000 people, so it really is building and recovering back to the place where Educause used to be that we all remember and love about Educause.
You got muted. Now we're back muted, sir.
Do we know where we left off?
Chris, where did you lose us? Did you hear about Innovative Learning? Innovative Learning? Invoke Learning. Okay, so let's start with Invoke Learning. So, small startup company.
We've been building products and platforms for about 4 years now. We're working with about 24 different colleges today. And what we're doing is, first of all, delivering a replacement to traditional data warehouses. Okay, data warehouses have been around for over 35 years, but they can be expensive. They're challenging to work with. They're difficult to extend with more data. And so the very first thing we did is we created a new approach to data warehousing that we call a data lake house.
Okay.
And it's all the best capabilities of a data lake and a data warehouse, specifically tailored for higher education, but done in a way that is very affordable. It gets up and running fast. It can be up and running as quickly as 5 weeks for many colleges, and really does a lot more than any traditional data warehouse is currently capable of doing. So it really does empower the colleges to really think about now, how do we want to take what we used to think we could do with data and just take it to a completely different place.
So what is, I mean, like, for most people, it's they're not going to understand the difference between a data warehouse and a data lake, right? So
Data lake
what,
house.
So data lake house. So what are the fundamental differences there in terms of what does a warehouse do that a lake can do, or vice versa?
So there are some, we'll talk about it from the standpoint of capabilities. So one of the problems with data warehousing is that it really encompasses just a little bit of data that an institution depends on, usually from just one or two key systems like the student information system or the learning management system. Almost never includes any public data, so we really don't understand that whole dynamic of students about the environments they live in and how that may affect their academic performance. And there's all these other systems that colleges use and depend on that never get used in any analytics. It could be card swipe systems, housing systems, it could be student success systems. But really, the first thing a data lakehouse does is it lets us really onboard data from all of the different systems that a college can use by bringing all of those key tables in, snapshotting them every day, and creating a level of historical stability for all of those source systems that just doesn't exist today. The second thing is we then take all that data and we roll it up into a warehouse. But unlike any other warehouse people have ever seen before, because that just a student warehouse can be like 100 tables. You have to learn how to join and navigate and work with in order to build reports and do analytics. We've actually taken advantage of a number of cloud capabilities to really rethink this. So we've actually folded all those dimensional tables back down to the key fact tables. So we're presenting an entire multi-source warehouse to colleges around students that are represented in 5 tables that require no joins, and really running a query. If you wanted to run a query that says, show me students that are under a 3.1 GPA, who are, we create a metric called the engagement metric, who are under a certain engagement score, let's say of 0.4, who do at least 10% of their work in the LMS after 8 o'clock at night, and who live in neighborhoods with elevated levels of unemployment. I mean, that is like an impossible query for most data warehouses.
The last one, the specificity, and you're pulling that from a public data set, or?
We are.
Okay.
We bring in data and we enrich the data for the colleges automatically from like the U.S. Census Bureau, the National Institute of Health, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, all of that automatically. So you can run a query like that off of our data lakehouse platform, and it's nothing but select this data from this table, where and group by and order by, and you're done. So that's what I mean by really empowering.
Spoken like a man who's done his fair share of SQL queries.
A fair bit, and which is, SQL can be. Funny enough, my wife, who was a Pete's ICU nurse when we met, and then developed her career in medical device, but then went back to school to get her medical informatics degree, so to get into the world of data that I've been doing, but instead doing for higher education, doing that kind of work in the medical industry. And by far, she said, for her own experience, the hardest course she took was her SQL course.
Oh, you can see from the gray hair. I've been around SQL for a long time. It's just one of those. There are magicians, and Absolutely. Then there's people who know SQL. It's crazy.
So, but really, at its core, all the technology is meant just to serve the institution so that it can better help understand and help support their students and operations.
Okay, cool. So, at Educause 2022. We've come out of the pandemic. I'm calling it. We've come out of the pandemic. Institutions are rethinking who they are. We just had some people on earlier today talking about diversity and inclusion. We had another person talk about wrangling the cloud. We had another person talking about what it's like to be a young professional. What do you see as maybe the 2 or 3 most critical things for higher education today, as it's kind of rethinking who it is or what it is as a sector?
Well, as we're coming out of the pandemic, the critical things that every college is focused on right now is enrollment and retention. Whether you're an institution that was very well supported because you had a lot of students that wanted to attend, so you didn't really feel that pinch, or you felt it dramatically. We have schools that dropped 30-50% enrollment over the course of the pandemic. There was an expectation that maybe these students would come back now that these schools were returning to more online, normalized classes, on premise again. And it's not happening. We're not seeing the kids coming back. We're not seeing the students re-engaging. And in fact,
I think even Educause just published something like a week and a half ago. It says the demand still through their hybrid or online is increasing, even though all we heard over the pandemic was we want to get back in the classroom.
And even the students that are returning on-prem are finding, especially if those institutions are further away from home, that they're wanting to come back and go to schools that are closer to home again.
Interesting.
I think to your point, primarily just so that they can be closer if they're going to be on-prem, but because online has become something that people have not only, I think, started to adapt to, but to really embrace on a much wider scale than we had before the pandemic.
So how is something like Educause, like the technologies that we see around us, how are they helping those institutions to evolve? Like, are we seeing leaders and those that aren't sort of keeping up pace? Is there a true evolution that we're going to be seeing in higher education over the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I had an old boss of mine who used to use a phrase, is this a solution looking for a problem? And there's a little bit of that when you get into the technology space where you have these really interesting technologies and capabilities. But are they really solving a problem that needs solving? Or are they interesting and cool for the sake of being interesting and cool? And I think that's really what colleges are navigating right now is there's all of this capability that's available. And I think colleges have learned by the transition to online at the beginning of the pandemic that their technology teams are maybe much more involved, capable, and present than they ever expected them to be. And that these are people they can depend on to bring technologies in. We just need to make sure, I say we as colleges, need to make sure that these are technologies that are solving problems that currently exist, as opposed to being interesting and cool for the sake of being interesting.
How has that changed? I think, I'm going to be talking with, I believe his name is Noah Gaia, if you remember that name. And one of the questions he posed out there was bringing that tech team to the table on RFPs on these problem solving sooner. Do you think that that's been happening in more and more institutions? Has that team evolved? I'm thinking again about the guest that we had earlier today. She was talking about North Carolina State University, and she said, we were 10 years back already when the pandemic, and now we've had the leapfrog. It's been a complete rethink at that university. How do you think this has changed?
No, I think so. Yeah, and I'm gonna do an analogous kind of story to this because there's a lot of similarity to this situation about colleges trying to involve IT and technology earlier that there is when you talk about data. In a lot of cases, in any organization, what happens is when people start to get worried about problems with their data, it's because they'll generally see something in a report and they'll say, my report is wrong.
Right.
But oftentimes, the report never changed.
No, I mean, the report is just the algorithm that is being spit out by the computer.
Correct.
Right?
But a lot of times it's because operationally at the front end, we maybe changed something about the way we're capturing data or what we're doing or how we're processing it. So, but you don't see it until it gets to the very end. And that's in a lot of cases, like IT was never involved until the very end in many cases. Right. So in a lot of cases, it used to be like the old phrase, the tail wagging the dog. You have to go investigate up the chain to find out what happened and accommodate that so that the college could, from a technology standpoint, continue to move forward. So I agree with you, though. I think that many colleges are now really looking at how they involve their IT teams in a lot of these challenges that they typically had brought to IT only after they decided what they were doing.
So if we're living, we're living in this place where you kind of mentioned, is this a problem in search of a solution? I went to HR Tech 3 weeks ago, I don't know, like a month ago. Yep. One of the things that I came out of HR Tech with, and it's very related to higher ed just because it's human, right? Is that AI is everywhere. And it seems to be this accepted thing. Because on every booth, it was AI this, AI that. I want to know, are the solutions that we've found in higher ed much more simple. Again, referring back to our colleague from North Carolina State, just changing their ticketing systems, from like a manual process to something that's automated. Things that probably you and I would think these are pretty simple fields. Is that what we need in higher ed right now, or is?
So AI is such an umbrella term to talk about a lot of different types of technologies. Whether you're talking about a chat bot that's helping to respond to students in real time, for example, all the way to, and we do have some AI enhanced applications, deep analytic applications, where we're using AI to really dive through all of that data that we're bringing to the table and help colleges better understand, for example, what are the behaviors, what are the descriptors that are involved when you look at a certain group and you try to understand why aren't they enrolling, why aren't they coming back, so that you can really focus that research time and stop sort of going down all the different rabbit holes that sometimes we're asked to go down, and really be able to come back to the table and say, actually, if we want to understand why we're not seeing enrollment from this type of student, it's because of this. Now, that last part is the part AI can't do, but yet everybody's a little bit worried about, is that idea that AI is somehow going to replace me as a person, right? And the need for me to do this job. Now, AI, I will tell you, is nowhere near there. You'll have companies that will tell you, my AI will tell you what to do, but what we have to understand is those AIs are being trained by other colleges that organization is working with that might not look like you. Right? Sure. Is a piece of advice that was implemented and successful for a 4-year university in Florida going to be just as applicable to an inner city community college, right, in Los Angeles? Probably not. And so I think that's one of the dangers when we try to replace that human element. Is let's involve AI to the point of empowering people to best do what we do, which is to engage, support, and advise.
Can you go one step further there as well? Is that because one of the things that I found in the AI conversation is that we want to erase the messiness of being a human. And I feel like it always comes back to the Spock-Kirk conversation, right? That's the beauty of being human. Can you dive any deeper there? Like, I've heard conversations around like entrance essays, for example, are being scanned and being machine read, and they're just like kind of looking for variables in language, right? So like, how deep is your vocabulary essentially? Right. Which really doesn't speak to, does this person have an original thought? They're just looking for vocabulary.
That's right. There's been a lot of leap and bound progress when it comes to moving beyond natural language processing and what they call natural language understanding. Right. The idea that you can feed in the text of Moby Dick and have an AI spit out a half-page synopsis. Right. So there's work that is going on in that direction, but I think you have a valid point. There's a difference between understanding and judging, right? Evaluating. And I think that's where people step in to say, you know what, this is an interesting turn of phrase. This is an interesting thought that's being presented. And that's really something that an AI is going to have a lot of difficulty learning how to do.
So as someone in the data business, talk to me about your top 2 or 3 challenges that most higher education institutions have. When getting over that barrier, is it just taking the deep breath and making, signing the check and saying, okay, we're ready to do this? Is it making sure the right stakeholders are at the table? Is it what are those challenges that you get to kind of leap into that?
I'm going to tackle this from a little bit of a different direction. So when I began working at Ivy Tech, that's where I met my partner in Invoke Learning, Ladek. Okay. And Ladek, for the 2 years before I arrived, had been doing really some of the most innovative work, architecturally speaking, around data that I'd ever come across. And as he and I talked, we began bouncing ideas off of each other, and we realized that if we weren't working in higher education, you only really needed to come up with an idea that was one of 3 things. That it would either be better, faster, or more flexible than whatever it was that we were doing today. Okay? But in higher education, especially at the community college where we were working, we realized that to do something new, it had to be 5 things. It had to be all 5. It had to be faster. It had to be more flexible. It had to be, better. But it also had to cost next to nothing, and it had to require almost nobody to build and support it. Now, as impossible as that seems, we could keep batting things around until we came up with ideas that sort of fit what we called the Magic 5. Right. Okay. And all the work that we did, which ended up winning a couple of international awards at Ivy Tech, were all different combinations of these Magic 5 ideas. Okay? And even the work we're doing today at Invoke Learning is, again, more combinations of these Magic 5 ideas that's enabling us to really build solutions that address a lot of the problems that colleges have when it comes to either working with data warehouses, onboarding enough data to better understand their students, or working with that data, understanding what those students really need to be supported effectively.
So I'm going to end with this question. I don't know what it could possibly be, but what are you excited about for not this school year, but the next one? You know, and when we get into next year and people are starting their planning processes, they're doing budgeting right now. What gets you excited? Is there some new shiny object? Is it a consortium that's coming together? Is there a new conversation? Is there a gelling around an idea?
No, I think what really excites me about the stage that we're in, and I know a lot of people talk about this return to a new normal, as though somehow calling it a new normal doesn't mean that it's not something completely different from the old normal.
I always thought that, for me, that's how the definition is that the new normal is that
That's right.
we've evolved, we've stepped up.
We are now in a really exciting time in higher education, where higher education has been given this opportunity to really rethink the way that it operates and the way that it works with and supports students. And I think as we're coming out of that, we're trying to return back to on-premise learning. We're trying to see how that works. How do we blend on-premise and distance or online learning? How are these working with students? How are students reacting? Are these what do we need to do? How do we reinvent ourselves as institutions in order to become higher education of the future?
Brandon Aldrich, Novel Learning, thank you so much for taking the time to speak up.
I appreciate it.
I don't know, you're not giving a presentation?
No, but anybody that'd like to learn more, they can go to invokelearning.com in order to learn about the work that we're doing there, or they can turn into my podcast at
The Higher Edge.
Right
here, you can see right here, The Higher Edge.
thehigheredge.com.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate it, Stephen. Thank you.
Ciao. So I'm just going to unmute. Chris, are you with us? Shazam. All right. So there is somebody out there listening. Just one person. We're back here live from Educause. I'm Ladek, and I'm here with three special. This is fantastic. I think we can see everyone. Chris, can you take down the menu? There we are. So, from Mike Pronovost.
That's right.
Did I get that correct?
Yes, that's right.
I'm going to butcher his name. Peter Mosinkis.
Perfect.
All right. And Kate Miffitt. And are you all three from the CSU system? So all from the California state system. And we're here to talk about digital access, digital equity through the lens of the provision of devices to students. And I want to throw the data point on the table to get started with is 40,000 devices. Is that where we're at right now?
Yeah, pretty close. Yeah, among 14. We started with 14 campuses initially year one, and we deployed about 29,000 that first year, and then since then we've gotten to pretty close to 40,000 devices, and now we're about 16 campuses.
60 campuses. 16.
16.
Okay. So maybe who would like to? What's the genesis of this digital access program? Like, at some point, either a group of people got together, or one person had a great idea, or whatever. Like, what's the genesis of saying let's give devices out?
Well, I'm happy to speak to that a little bit. So, digital equity has been such an important issue for the CSU overall. I think our commitment to finding better ways to serve students, I think, was really brought to light through the pandemic. And as we had to pivot to figure out how can we really keep students connected and how do we keep them engaged. And so the great thing about it is we're a big system, 23 campuses, we serve 480,000 or more students.
It's bigger than some countries.
Yeah.
You know, when you think, no, quite honestly, I mean, if you think about it, it's incredible ecosystem.
Yeah, so to try to do something to really help students in as much of a universal way as we could, I think we had some really excellent executive sponsorship and support of the campuses, our 23 campuses, and again, that subset of campuses that was really interested in tackling that issue at that time. And so that was kind of the nutshell of where we grew out from. There have been efforts to address digital equity and the digital divide over the years that our campuses have tried really hard to enable access. And I think the pandemic really gave us a great opportunity to try to do things in a bit of a different way.
So how long has this been around? Sorry, go ahead, please. Add to that.
Sorry, I was just going to mention that in the fall 2020, we had partnered with Educause to conduct a special study on student access to broadband and devices. So, and we had, I think, 4 of our campuses participated in the quantitative survey that was sent out, and we found about 9 to 10% of students at our campuses, which is higher than the national average, did not have reliable access to devices. So that was one kind of data point that informed the program. I think the genesis kind of came from Berkeley State, but if you extrapolate that out, 10% of students in our system is 50,000 students.
I was just going to say, I mean, 10 students out of 100, that's a really big deal. Right?
Yeah, and that number might not be no device, it might be a shared device, or they're doing things on a smartphone, but in terms of having something reliable that they can put their person on it, so pretty significant. So that was that partly informed, I think.
Okay. And sorry, maybe I missed it when you first said it. So has this only been around for 2 years now, or when did it actually start, the device?
Yeah. So C-Success started June of last year.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah,
so only last year.
Yeah. So it's been quite a runway to get to this point.
Yeah. Okay.
As Kate had mentioned, the genesis of the program started from our executive leadership at the CSU, really focused on how do we close the digital divide by providing technology to students that don't have access to it. Secondarily, how do faculty leverage technology in the classroom to do new things that they weren't capable of doing before students came with that level of technology?
So is this like, I mean, maybe I'm going out of line. Does this speak to device as a right? So is there a piece in there where at least the California state system has said, we recognize that, in order to actually have a equitable path with everybody else, you've got to have one of these devices. Is that like written somewhere, or is there a movement in that direction?
I yeah. So I think what we're really trying to do is make sure that all students have equitable access to technology as a whole, right? So similar to the survey that Kate's talking about, we also Fresno initially started a program called Discovery, which was similar, and that was started in 2014. The idea behind that was if you can provide a similar level device to all students, how does that change what happens in the classroom? And there was some really interesting findings from that. What we're really trying to figure out is when we survey students and say, do you have access to technology? That could mean anything, right? They might say, well, I have access to a 10-year-old desktop at home, right? So how do we provide a similar device to all students going forward so that students feel they have what they need to succeed, and our faculty feel comfortable knowing when a student comes to my class, they have X, Y, or Z device, and they can teach based on it.
Has your presentation already happened? I can't remember.
No, it's good. Yeah, our presentation is coming up this Friday. It's 9 o'clock.
9 o'clock on Friday. Okay, so you haven't had feedback. What I was trying to get is you haven't had feedback on what you're going to be presenting. Go ahead.
We presented it internally to so we conducted an evaluation in the spring, and we were able to share the results of that shared it kind of within the system.
Okay. What's the feedback been from the internal system? And what I'm really interested, like where I'm going with this is, what was really successful, what failed, what was unexpected, what like the aha moments.
I mean, a couple of data points, and the data shows that students overwhelmingly like the program. And the kind of things that we were interested in were, there was the digital equity question, like did it shift how many students have access to reliable devices? And then we were really interested in, does it shift students' perceptions and the sense of belongingness and preparedness to these successful students? And it was like something like over 90% of students either strongly agree with me or that they felt better supported by educators about being part of this.
Wow. And does that include students outside of the program as well, or just students who receive help?
The population that was surveyed were students that were eligible to receive it. So the students that did not opt to get one kind of were sent on a different branching pathway of questions, and then the ones that did receive advice reported that they were felt supported.
That's fantastic. So felt supported, and do we? I guess let's take it there though. What were some of the most significant challenges of rolling out a device to those who are eligible? Right? I mean, is it selecting the device? Is it just getting it to them? Is it replacing the ones that get broken? Like, what are the biggest challenges that you found in the program so far?
Can we say all of that? Kind of. Well, I think the and I think to what Caleb mentioned around the awareness of the program, I think there were some really interesting things that came out of the assessment and some of the anecdotal feedback that we received. Just about students being aware that the program was there. And we know campuses went through a lot of effort to try to publicize this through multiple channels. And it's still, students are sometimes still challenged to, I think, get the right information through the right kinds of channels and to really feel comfortable around what it is that they're receiving and the benefits that they're getting. I think that was another thing that was maybe uncovered a little bit is maybe there is a sense of students not really being sure of what they're getting, and do they feel, especially for students that may not have had access to a device previously, do they feel comfortable that they can engage with this device, they can use it in the way that they want, and that it support their academic experience, and that they won't be held liable if something, if they drop it and it breaks, especially for a lot of our students that are challenged to have access to devices. That having access to devices has been a real enabler, but it could also be a real problem if they can't use the device, or they feel like they have to treat it in a certain way so that they won't be challenged in other ways.
This really is interesting because it's think there's a Venn diagram. I don't know, I'm not sure if dovetailing is the right word there. I don't know my metaphors very well. But it's a gentleman named Michael Kubit and Clant that we're working with as well. They're both from Team Mobile, and they're going to be talking about digital equity. So this same type of equity. And one of the interesting kind of three conversations I had with them, like I was kind of talking with you guys, is the device given to a person who didn't have access before. It's kind of it's one of those holy grail moments where it's like, what is it? Do I even know what to do with this? So I find it really interesting that you're now getting really hard data on that particular issue. Do you see like a massive uptick? Like, I mean, I give an iPad to my 8-year-old, and she's a whiz, right? And so I'm just wondering, do we see that same kind of thing happening? You know, that hockey stick access, like understanding.
Yeah. So what's really interesting is, especially Fresno has some really good data around. Fresno State has some good data about the, in our program about this, particularly because they have several years worth of data on their training. But what we didn't realize initially, even in Fresno, is that when you hand a device to a student, they may say they know how to use that device. But
I'm going to lie to you too to get an iPad.
Yeah, exactly, right? Exactly, whatever it takes, right? But then when they actually get into the classroom, they may not really understand how to utilize that for their class, or how to use that for productivity, or utilize that at home, right? So there was what we realized, we've got to build in training for students when they pick up the device. And a lot of the students that even had access to technology before, maybe they had a different device. Maybe they had an Android and they get an iPad. It might be a different training experience on that too. So what we try to do is incorporate that when they pick up the device, they go through training, and it's just a part of the process when you get the device. Everybody gets that training, so you don't feel like, why am I afraid to ask those questions? We kind of lower the playing field, so everybody has an opportunity to do that. The other way we do that is we have other students that do peer training. Yeah, exactly. And believe it or not, in campuses that utilize that, they have a higher engagement rate among students than going to their help desk staff. Help desk staff. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I feel like, do you find that in the student population? Like, if you see someone struggling, they're going to reach out, or there's that peer-to-peer learning in like real time of, hey, let me show you how to do it, or even, would you say even within the beneficiary population, have they kind of created support groups and those kinds of things?
Yeah, I think they have their go-to friends and peers that are willing to answer questions. Similar to the survey actually asked this question: how do you get your technology support? The vast majority of students will also do it through YouTube or social media. Yeah, so they've learned to go online. I think I'm trying to recall the stats on it. I don't know. There's something like 35% of students utilize social media to get their technology help, and then I guess I'm blanking on the additional components of that. But that seemed to be the majority, followed by some on-campus training and trying to troubleshoot themselves.
Well, it's really interesting. I love to hear you just kind of look at it as well. It's like every device in the world can do that, but everybody throws away immediately, right? Like, I'm as guilty as anybody else. And have we entered the age of the hacker, right? Where it's, look, I've been making this argument on the podcast for a very long time now, where we like to think of online education, we like to think of online learning as learning management systems and these SISs and devices. And I'm like, I think the Google search is the most important one. Like that, because we have immediate problems, we get immediate solutions, right? And we like to call it micro-learning and these sorts of things, but really, we've been doing it forever. That was just how I said that. Any aha moments that came out of the survey or that have come out of the program thus far where it's like, we didn't expect that to happen, or is it a really interesting piece of data?
So we asked a question around a whole list of course activities that students could use the device for. So things like accessing library resources, checking out. And the top two, they were all, again, very highly, a lot of strong agreement that students like using the device for those things. But the two that were most popular among students were taking notes and accessing the elements, which are two things we really want to support students to be able to do. So the fact that having the device and moving those activities is really important. The two things that were at the least level of satisfaction were creating multimedia and manipulating or accessing data. So that, I think, whether it's because the least common activity or the least has the lowest ease of use on a mobile device. We don't know that, but I think those are the two things that that's the best.
What device do they receive? Or does it use it a certain amount?
Yeah, it's a more interesting system now compared to that, but the initial was iPad.
Because I would think that resources like Canva or some of these like online creation tools that make multimedia creation easier. I'm not sure if I'm thinking about your typical student, how much multimedia do they really need to create? That speaks to the creativity of the professors. But then data manipulation, that's a pretty select skill set. How much data manipulation do you use? I don't know.
It's something that has come up in our conversations. I think is that set of tools and how that set of tools is used within the platform, and really try to dive in more depth to really understand in a broader context how the platform and the set of tools fit in with what specific disciplines, specific academic disciplines need and the direction that they can go. I think that's a really interesting opportunity that we're also looking to try to continue to tap into, is really creating those connections. So helping students really on a per program or per discipline basis, and the faculty in those disciplines also understand what are the opportunities that are available with that platform to increase engagement, to make their academic experience better, support teaching and learning, or other things that are related to the academic experience.
So, everybody's going to want to know this. What's the replacement? Like, you've given out some 40,000 devices. Is it lower than you thought? Is it higher than you thought? Is it?
It's less. It's less than 1%, believe it or not. Yeah, it was surprising. There's some other industry articles that talk about this, and I was a little surprised that also lines up with what they've seen. Usually when I read some of those, I was like, I don't know about that, right? But part of that, I do think, though, so I will say, some of our campus, they're including cases and things like that to make sure that that device is being dropped. But on top of that, many students, this is their first device, right? They're really taking care of that device.
It's like your first big, if you've been gifted this special thing, like you kind of treat it real special.
Exactly. As for one of the one of the aha moments was a lot of stuff that occurs on campus, right? You send email announcements. Well, we found a lot of students, obviously, if they don't have access to a device, aren't checking their email.
Right.
So you'd say, how come I sent out 3 emails? I don't know why students don't pick them up, right? So that's one of the reasons we also say we need to integrate this into like orientation, something like that, where we know that they're there and they have an opportunity to hear about what it is. Because a lot of people are skeptical too, right? Like, how many times have you told in your email you're getting a free device, you're getting something free, right? You just won $100, right? That goes straight to spam, or you're going to delete it because you think it's fake. So a lot of students want to know what's the catch, right? And so you have to take the time to explain to them that that's the whole point of the program.
Is there a give back? So do they get the device for a certain amount of time, and then once it's completed their degree, they give it back? Is there an end of life for the device? Is there, hey, you're failing out, so you got to get the device back? Like you haven't met some criteria, everything like that?
So when the program has actually undergone some changes. So when the program originally launched, the device distribution was really focused on getting devices in the hands of first-time freshmen and students. And it was that iPad bundle that was offered to those students. In our current iteration, we've actually opened it up. So it's now a multi-platform model. And with regards to student access, we've really made it possible for campuses to evaluate what are the needs of students on those campuses and to try to tune that, sort of balance the equation or equations related to getting access to those devices to students. So what kind of devices do students need in maybe even in specific disciplines. How long do they need those devices? What kinds of applications might need to exist on those devices? All of those discussions now are really being managed in somewhat different ways at our campuses, and we're glad to see a really broad range of flexibility for different student needs.
So, what's your, like, give me a sense of what does school year 2020-2024 look like? So the program is rolling out. Actually, before you answer that, you've got 24 campuses. How come only 16 are taking part of it? Like, what does a part of the network need to do to say, yeah, they have to raise their hand and say, yes, we want to be a part of it? And like, why wouldn't it just get activated for all of the system?
I want to speak to it a little bit.
Yeah,
I'm happy to chime in as well.
Yeah, so I do think that there's we're trying to, campuses want to identify, okay, going forward, what does this look like, right? Because the minute you start this, right, let's say, for example, you roll in freshman class and sophomore class, right? You need to identify funding sources going forward. You need to identify supports services that are going to support those devices. And so, it's like any sort of grassroots effort, right? We start with a small number of campuses and then eventually become champions, and then they grow from there. And, again, one of our champion campuses now is Fresno State, but they started with just like 1,200 students initially and 40 faculty that wanted to say, okay, I'll allow this in my class. And now it's the whole campus. So I do think that's a better approach than just saying we're going to mandate across the whole system. We want some skin in the game. And we want people to have some ownership. Yeah, exactly. So I do think that's also what's been helpful about the changes is campuses get that opportunity to say, here's what that looks like on my campus, and here's how we can do that in some unique way.
Is there buy-in from Apple on the back end in any way? Is it all live guys, or is there vendor support? Is there I don't know where the funding comes from. Like, if I were one of these, I'd be like, hey, look, I want people to get my device because then they're going to be lifetime buyers and those kinds of things. Is there? And I don't mean that in a nefarious way at all. It's a very tried and true methodology. Does that happen? I mean,
yeah, I think we've had really good support from what I think is becoming an ecosystem of members. So, we started out the program with the support of Apple and some other partners. We use Jamf for mobile device management. CDW was a huge partner for us for getting devices actually out to the campuses and into the hands of students. And so we continue to work with those partners. We're also partnering now. Microsoft's one of our key partners because we also have a standard Microsoft device as part of the C6S program that is made available. So, and we're really looking for any other partners that are really interested in this space.
Make a pitch.
Well, hey, in terms of the reach and what we're doing in the CSU, I think the opportunity to serve that many students in such a diverse system, and the CSU has a huge impact on social mobility in California. I think nationwide, based on the number of students that we graduate. So having partners that are really interested in continuing to work in the space, and it's not just around devices. It's really again around removing those access barriers. So what are some of those other access barriers? Well, we know broadband access.
I was just going to say, just getting online is
that's a huge part of it. And so we also have partnered with AT&T and T-Mobile through the program to provide mobile broadband access through the program. That's been a great partnership as well. We're continuing to really look for whatever opportunities we can to sort of check things off the list. Virtual computer labs, lab virtualization. Another, people don't necessarily think of that as a technology or equity issue, but being able to access computing resources from anywhere, not necessarily having to come to a physical space on campus during specific hours, where if you're a non-traditional student or maybe an adult learner, that might be extremely difficult to do. So, there are, I think, a lot of opportunities that are related to this that we're still looking for partners.
Wow. I'm There's about 700 questions I could still ask, but I feel like you need to ask you that.
Right.
So what's next? Actually, before we do that, what's failed? What hasn't? You know, and like certain individuals, just never kind of caught into the program. Devices failed. Partnerships ignored. What?
I don't know that I would characterize anything as a failure at this point. We're just learning, as we go. But one of the, you asked about feedback that we got on some of the internal presentations, and there was a really big conversation around kind of the language that you use for access efforts. So, some parallel examples of campuses might be like campus banks, for example. How do you destigmatize access to things that students need to be successful in? And so again, it's like, how do you frame a device loaner program so that there's stigma attached to needs testing, students are not having to reveal private information in order to get the device, that it's really perceived as a student success effort and not that doesn't have any negative associations with they want to have children. And so I think that's something that we can be more thoughtful about moving forward. Like, how do we talk about this in such a way that students feel welcome and they want to participate? I think that's something to think about.
Any like before we, I asked my usual closer, any innovation that's come out of this? Any, again, I don't want to say an aha in the data, but sort of an unusual partnership that's come out of maybe the students have been working on it, a discovery in how they're accessing campuses or how they're able to access internet, or any sort of
talking about the CSSA partnership.
That's come out.
Yeah, so we have essentially what's our student government, what's known as CSSA, and it's run by students, comprised of all of all the campuses. And it's been really interesting because they really latched onto this program because obviously they want to champion something that benefits the students and that they can visually see an effect, right? And the partnership has been incredible. And I don't know that I do think that we intentionally wanted to work with them, but the fact that the level of championship that they took themselves to really spearhead this and to want to talk with others about it. So they talk to other divisions, they talk to student affairs, to couple it with our food pantries. And I think that it was a partnership that we were really excited to see, because how many times in IT do you get an opportunity to really sit down one-on-one with students day to day? Sometimes you don't get that opportunity as often as you'd like. And so this was really something that allowed us to collaborate at another level.
If you're gonna go ahead.
I just wanted to add to something that Mike said, the student partnership with basic needs, because I think this is what this has brought to light is through what we've experienced with the pandemic, how much this kind of technology access is really a basic needs issue. And incorporating that into the language that we have around basic needs and leveraging those partnerships, I think is really important. And I think will continue to be important to us being able to reach many people.
So, final question: any mimickers? Any copycat programs? Anybody else saying?
Hey, sorry about that.
You have a huge ecosystem. You've got a huge. The eyes are on CSU in a lot of ways. Or that state system. Is Wyoming doing this? Is Idaho doing this?
Well, I'm going to say we're trying to copy from some of the best, and I think some of the best we have some campuses in our system are doing this really well, and we know there are other systems that are working on equity initiatives that are similar. I'm trying to remember some of the other ones that come to mind. I want to say the University of Kentucky was one that I think we looked at. At the beginning, that was, I think, inspiration for us. We try to steal from the best as well.
That's right. Yeah. I know Ohio State was also doing something similar. We collaborated with them a lot on some of this work that they've done. It's really unique is that, I think the real benefit of higher ed is that you get to collaborate, right? And it's not seen as like a real
it's not competition.
Yeah, exactly. And so they shared findings with us, and we've shared findings that we've seen, and so it's benefited our students, and that's what we're here to do. So,
Mike Pronovost, Peter Mosinkis, and Kate Miffitt. Thank you so much for your time today. Looking forward to Friday 9 a.m. Come check out your presentation here at Educause. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
All right, folks, we're back here at Educause. I'm Ladek. This is Chris Hoffman. Just remind me where you're from.
I am from UC Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley.
We're going to talk about VR and AR.
Sure. It's one of my projects that I really love working on. Absolutely.
Well, I think I reached out to you because that's the presentation you're giving, right? It's what's the topic specifically around VR and AR that you're looking at?
We've been taking the kind of AR and VR technologies and looking at them through a futures framework. So instead of kind of just doing the general kind of strategic planning and kind of listening to pundits, we're actually applying a futures framework to develop scenarios and signals that we can kind of pay attention to. So we're talking about how
you're gonna have
this.
to educate me on what a futures framework is, because I hate it when somebody throws something on the table that I don't know. But what does that mean?
Well, a futures framework is actually developed, out of higher education, out of some kind of corporate, consulting companies. Started in the Bay Area, actually, with the holder of the catalog is kind of a hippie tech movement that was out in the Bay Area. Okay.
Oh my lord!
This was kind of an outgrowth of that in the '80s. They kind of evolved into this what was called the Global Business Network, and then into the other companies like Institute for Future Thinking. I'm actually forgetting the name, IFTF. But they kind of over the last 30 years, they've developed a whole methodology around developing scenarios, looking at trends. And it's actually demonstrated by research that they've gone on to an interesting approach.
Wow, cool. And so what is this, when you say you're approaching VR and AR and XR through a future framework, you're basically, do you look 5 years out? Do you look 15 years out? Does that time frame matter?
And the futures framework thinking is very interesting because they talk about 10 years as actually being kind of a magical number, right? It's far enough out that, there are changes that happen. If you look at things from a decade on.
Think about how different you and I were 10 years ago,
exactly,
right?
Exactly. And at the same time, you're not as wedded. If you think about something you might do in 3 years or 5 years, you still kind of have some ownership of that. In 10 years, you're kind of like, hey, whatever, let's explore this. So you're much less kind of tied to some preconceptions. Okay. So 10 years is actually a good kind of time frame to think about to do these kind of futures things.
And when you're looking at the future framework, let's just keep it within like the construct of VR.
Yeah.
You're thinking, how is this being applied? You're thinking, is this a part of everyday life? Are those the kind of thought games that you get to play? Or?
Yeah, you actually develop different scenarios based on whether you think change will be conservative or incremental or dramatic, and whether you think the impact of those changes in your sphere will be kind of minimal or medium or high impact. So you develop different scenarios, and you actually then look at the kind of signals that you should be paying attention to see like what kind of futures might be emerging. And simultaneously, with those scenarios, you can say, that's a scenario I want to aim towards, or that's like something I'd like to avoid. So it also helps you identify actions that you can take right now.
Super cool. So take me to some of your scenarios. Like, can you put them on the table here? Or is there a way to describe them?
Well, the full talk is on Thursday, and it's really my colleague Owen McGrath from UC Berkeley who's really developed these. But we've developed scenarios where I think our favorite scenarios that we think are probably happening. There will be incremental change, and it might be low impact or high impact. There are so many unknowns right now. Some of it has to do with technology. AR glasses are going to come out. Will that be kind of very disruptive? Will it be disruptive in higher education, or will kind of conservative status quo forces that do exist on our campuses, will they kind of inhibit the change actually taking place on our campus? So will higher ed be a follower in these technologies? So this is when you start aspiring to like what you would like to do to kind of shape what kind of scenario might emerge.
How are your scenarios informed by what has already happened in VR today?
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking, let's just keep in the learning space right now. We know that it's fundamentally changing how, for instance, like a lot of corporate safety training is happening. Right. I'm thinking firefighting, like really high risk, super high impact, got to get it right the first time.
Yeah.
But you don't necessarily want to have fires every day to train, that kind of stuff. So we know that it's having certain impact in a lot of different ways.
Right.
How does that inform the future.
Absolutely, yeah. So, for instance, if you look at what's happening in medical schools, where they've really, taken to these technologies more than probably other education kind of domains. Yeah, med schools are really using this to develop like surgery techniques. It's the same thing. It's something you want people to be good at, but you don't want them to have to practice on live people that much, right? So you want, there are new techniques, whether it's surgery or nursing, even policing, where people are learning like empathy training through a more immersive virtual reality kind of experience. So we're definitely looking at those trends, and what's happening on the ground right now is absolutely very important. And that's where there's so much change happening. And what we see in higher education, aside from things like med schools and things like training firefighters or disaster response, it seems to be more. There are no exceptions, of course, but kind of pockets of excellence. Right? Like we've got at UC Berkeley, we have an amazing professor in the School of Architecture who's developing VR applications. She has a lab, and she's really kind of at the cutting edge, at least on our campus. There's some great hardware development going on in the College of Engineering, and then software development too. Like how do you recognize space in real time using these sensors? But they're isolated, and they collaborate more with people at other universities in their field than they do with other people on campus. So one of the things that we're trying to do is really bring those, what we call the pockets of excellence, together so they can inform each other. And so at the same time, we can then promote the importance of some values that are important to us, things like accessibility, things like security and privacy, interoperability, and being able to reuse a 3D model that was created for documentation purposes in a VR application, in a virtual classroom experience. And these are kind of things that, I work with a central service provider organization, Research, Teaching, and Learning, and those are things that we think about. How would we actually support this at scale and addressing the things that we know are important, like accessibility, super important on our campus. So we can't just let that evolve chaotically. We need to try to steer the ship a little bit.
How is your work informed by the only thing that's popping into my head right now is the gaming community? I'm thinking of the Fortnites of the world, the Minecrafts of the world, like said, these large scale kind of universes that people spend an awful lot of time in.
Right.
Is that 2D, 3D world a part of this conversation? Even though it's not a device, or maybe, I guess. Yeah, I'm just thinking now that you can actually play like Minecraft 3D in a virtual setting as well. So
right. Well, yeah, and that's where kind of the student connection comes in. Right? So Berkeley, like many other universities, has what used to be the VR club, and is now an XR club. So a student club that's
called the XR club now.
It's called the XR club now. They have student groups of students developing projects. Most of them are around developing a game. That ends up being one of the more straightforward projects to do. A lot of the development is happening in game development engines like Unity and Unreal, thank you. Yeah, so that has allowed us, engaging with students is something that we've been doing and forming our community of practice. And so we've brought in students who, they've been gaming all their lives, and we've been asking them to do things like go into a social metaverse, a social XR metaverse application. What they like about it, what don't they like about it, and we've asked them to think about it from the context, from the perspective of being in a class. How would this work for you in a classroom setting or a small group setting? Yeah. So yes, absolutely. And it's through that engagement with students that we're really hearing. They know more about what's going on, and certainly more about what students want out of these kinds of technologies.
So, you kind of thinking of that future scenario, that future forward-looking scenario. What are some of the, if this, in order to achieve this, these things have to happen, and you can either look at it as from a positive light of these are the paths we have to take, or these are the barriers that have to be overcome.
Yeah.
Like, what are some of those barriers that you've either discovered or you've hypothesized?
Yeah. Well, one of the ones that I'm really interested in is kind of security and privacy, right? So these these technologies, as you start wearing these headsets and wearing different kinds of sensors and hand controllers, and the next generation of some of these headsets is some of them is going to have like 14 cameras on them.
I think the one my son has is like 10 right now. So yeah, it's
So
crazy.
the amount of data that they're gathering, not only about us and
The space you live in,
yeah,
the
the
things
space
that you,
exactly. So they're gathering a lot of data and using it both to make the experience better, which is great. But what else are they doing with the data? And higher education has been kind of the victim, I would say, or has not paid attention to kind of the terms and conditions and agreements with vendors. And often it's because we don't actually have control. It's something a student has decided to use or a teacher has decided to use, and then momentum grows, and all of a sudden we find out that, oh, actually, all these amazing privacy issues that exist. And I think a lot of people in the virtual reality and augmented reality space are really concerned as well. How do we make sure that we have some principles, that we have that people are aware of just how identifiable their data is becoming from working with these technologies. So again, if you think about that from a kind of a university perspective, like of a service provider, you just can't ignore that.
Sure. And what? I mean, do those councils exist? Are there committees? Are there government? I guess it wouldn't be government bodies, but at least global associations or international associations like this. Or
there are some policy groups in the U.S. and international. IEEE is interested in this topic. There are some. You'll see various articles where people have said, like, okay, the metaverse needs to be open. There needs to be one metaverse, not many. And right now, all of this is very vendor-driven. You have the Microsoft metaverse, you have the Facebook metaverse, right? Everybody has their own metaverse. And think about it, compared to the beginning of the internet, right, where there was such a passion about this being a shared, open space, and of course now we see what's happened, but at least it had that foundation where really, I don't know, maybe there's still one internet, conceptually maybe there is, but the metaverse right now is so kind of vendor fragmented that that's a key kind of difference.
How does someone experience that? I mean, I don't know if you can speak to that, but some people talk about, holy smokes, the term has just gone right out of my head, where access to services and those kinds of things. There's a lot of lobbying efforts from internet service providers to basically say, look, I want to be able to throttle control and provide those kinds of things, which then the right to access becomes an issue. Right. What are some of the key things around that, if you're able to speak to it, that people should be concerned about, or maybe people need to think about?
Yeah. Well, great question. I mean, I think just in terms of making these things work. Right now, they're hard to use, right? The equipment's hard to use. It's heavy on your head. I think technology we'll see some technology innovations that make the technology more usable. Already we've seen, costs are dropping, so there's increasing adoption. But I think the kind of vendor fragmentation and the security issues and data privacy issues are the ones that I really worry about. In terms of kind of just bandwidth and limiting bandwidth, this stuff, everybody's saying that 5G is going to be a great enabler for these technologies. Maybe it will. That'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I went to it's interesting to see what some people with a lot of money are doing with some of these technologies. In the Bay Area right now, there's a big warehouse that's been converted into a virtual reality space, and you put on a Quest 2 headset and you can walk through the International Space Station. And there is, for the Quest 2, there is a virtual reality tour of the space station, but this is different because you can actually walk.
Moving.
It's in a large physical space like the space we're in here, and I'm pretty sure they're using 5G as part of this to really, you can interact, go into different scenes very quickly. It's very smooth. There were some bugs.
And the 5G, the whole thing about 5G is that it enables the volume of data in order to refresh and just make the experience real.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Right. Because the technologies are still just not, they're immersive compared to looking at a computer screen.
Of course, yeah.
But they're still, glitchy and heavy on your, come out with a dent in your forehead, these kinds of things. Yeah.
They make me dizzy. I don't know. Every time I put my sons on, they make me car sick.
So I can go for about an hour and 15 minutes, and I'm ready for a break then. Yeah.
So let's talk about let's. I think we have a few minutes left here. Yeah. Let's talk about adoption. In is this going to be a leapfrog moment? Because I have a hard time seeing. I'm going to call myself old, but my generation giving two hoots about VR. You know what I mean? I think it's right now. It's a gimmick. It's something that's our kids use, those kinds of things. But we're still a very large part of the global population.
Yeah.
What does that look like in terms of in your future scenario? Is there a critical hockey moment? A hockey stick moment where adoption just becomes a thing?
No, I think it's going to be very gradual, very incremental. And one of the things it says to us as service providers is that even if we do come up with ways to provide some content in a Quest or headset, we also have to make sure that works in a computer on a 2D screen, right? Because even if a lot of people get headsets and you start creating content specifically for that, you still have to support the many people who will not have that. So I think in terms of that's kind of one of our principles. That, is that many of these social XR environments or metaverse environments, many of them do support both a kind of a general computer login through the web, but some of them don't. Like you really have to have the headset or you can't participate. So that's an issue for us. And I lost the thread of the question there.
It was basically adaptability and sort of like, will there be a hockey stick moment where we start to see VR everywhere, and even going into a grocery store, it's going to be a VR experience, that kind of stuff.
The one thing that I think has some real potential is AR glasses. Like if you get some augmented reality glasses that are lightweight and people aren't freaking out too much about the privacy issues. But then what it comes down to is content, right? So you have this great, and people in higher education are talking about this a lot, that, you can get content that's provided by these vendors, or you can get games, but the experiences that are really related to learning are far and few and far between, right? And that actually puts kind of the pressure on us in higher education to create the content that matters to higher education. And the content creation part is expensive and hard and requires very specialized skills. So how we get there to a point where we have enough content where it will bring people to these technologies that want to use them, that could be a very long time. And the risk is if we don't at least start to do it now, the risk is that companies will do it for us. Right? So you think about
has happened in so many other sectors in so many different ways. I mean, when you don't understand something, the person who's created it starts to write the rules, and they become self-advantageous in those kinds of things.
If you think about augmented reality glasses, if you're walking around on a campus and you want to provide some augmented experiences on your campus, do you want Facebook, Meta to be doing that, or how do we guide that process too, where people will be able to see like, the library is open, it's here's the direction to that space, or to the student club gathering or something like that, as opposed to advertisements for I don't know, you name your product, energy drink or something like that, hanging above you in your library. Just see a massive.
Library brought to you by Coca-Cola.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome.
Well, they might need that actually. A little extra funding.
So, as someone final question, someone who's looked forward, thought about AR and VR really hard, what are you most excited about? Like, what gets you going, and you're like, this is going to be really cool.
Yeah. Well, I think it's that immersive experience where you can be places and experiencing things that you couldn't otherwise. Mm-hmm. And I think higher education is so full of stories that can be brought to life in really exciting ways. I've worked a lot with archaeologists, and that's actually what my degree is in. And archaeology stories are just waiting to be told. I worked on a VR application with some Egyptologists, and I think it's just one of the coolest things out there. When I compare it to what is available on the Oculus store or something, this is something that was developed by a couple of Egyptologists, one at Berkeley, one at Santa Cruz. It brings together their research and gets people excited about about the past
For
in
sure.
in this case. So it's about the stories that we want to tell in higher education. I think it's a great format for that.
Super cool. Chris, sorry, I almost called you Peter Hoffman. I don't know why. Chris, thank you so much for coming by today. I really
Ladek,
appreciate
I really
it.
enjoyed it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks
Enjoy
for inviting
Educause.
me.
I hope it's a great conference rate.
Sounds good.
All right.
Take care.
Coming up next is Lisa Stevens in just a few minutes. Stick around.
Same way,
Jingle
too.
Heimerschmidt or something.
Jared Jingleheimer Schmidt.
Yeah,
I don't know. What is it?
his name is my name too, or something like
Talking about things that I don't understand.
that. Okay.
I'm here to talk about. So we're back live here at Educause. My name is Ladek. I'm here with OpenLMS, and see now it's Crazy Frazee. Is that right? Rebecca Frazee?
Rebecca Frazee.
Rebecca
That's
Frazee,
right.
okay.
That's right.
And Lisa Stevens. And we're going to talk about something called Flex Space.
We are.
Awesome. So would you do me the favor of introducing yourselves? Tell me what institution you are from.
Sure.
And we can kind of sort of get into that. What the heck is Flex Space and how did the genesis of it and all that good stuff. I'll give you the mic.
We'll start here first.
Yeah.
All right. So I am an assistant dean in our School of Engineering and Applied Sciences at the University of Buffalo. But I have the coolest job in the world because I also wear a second hat where I have the opportunity to work as a senior strategist at the SUNY System Administration in the Office of the Provost.
Okay.
And the Flex Space initiative that we're going to chat about was actually started out of the SUNY side of the formula. And
Thank
describe who you are.
Yeah, I'm Rebecca Frazee. I teach at San Diego State University, and I in the Learning Design and Technology program. So it's a master's program for instructional design.
Sure, okay.
And so anybody from K-12, higher ed, workplace training and development. So I come from the pedagogy, instructional design perspective, and then I joined the Flex Space Initiative probably about 6 years ago. So I also teach a class on learning environment design, and have fully enjoyed wearing the different hats, working with the different campus community members around Flex Space, and also bringing that lens of the pedagogy that is also should be driving the design of spaces.
Okay, that's fantastic. And so are all of the meetings in her office in San Diego, or?
That'd be nice.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I'm sorry, I'm partial to tropical. That's just my thing.
We've had a meet up on the boat, right?
We
in
have.
San
We've
Diego.
done,
That's right. That's
we've
right.
done meetups on boats.
Yeah,
That's
yep,
true.
yep, that's right.
No, it's a lake boat though. I mean, it could be a
Well,
lake
San
boat.
Diego.
Lake Ontario, San
San Diego, Mission Bay. Yeah, that's right.
So I have no idea how long. First of all, I want to give a shout out to you. You're a winner of the Community Builder Award. Is that the name of it?
Leadership.
I think Community Leadership Award.
And so this is a big deal. This is fantastic. You've just been recognized by thousands and thousands of colleagues.
It
Yeah.
was.
That's amazing.
It's very cool. It's certainly a career highlight,
Yeah.
and it's wonderful to work with fantastic people and be able to be of service to the higher education community in general.
That's really great. And so this award, why would someone like yourself get this award? What were the criteria, and what have they recognized that you've done over the past years in order to say this is the time?
I really can't tell you.
She's a fraud.
I was
She's a fraud.
I was nominated, and a committee reviewed the dossier
Okay,
that was
all right.
submitted, and
Worked out.
for certain, the driver was when our SUNY level provost walked into an advisory group, a grassroots advisory group that I had the privilege of chairing at the time, and said, we're spending millions and millions of dollars building and renovating learning environments, and I'm not even convinced we have the right people sitting around the table. And that's about the time active learning was coming into vogue, and the butts in seat metric was no longer going to be as effective as it was. So it needed more space, needed to facilitate team-based learning. And so we started sharing in a beta release of what became the Flexible Learning Environments Exchange, and took it to a couple of conferences, and people started responding with enthusiasm, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, so what Lisa is downplaying is that this was sort of an internal tool in the SUNY system. And then, like she said, at a few conferences, this was before I came on board, hands were shooting up, we want to be a part of this.
How do I become a part of that?
And so it's really wonderful because we're providing this resource that everyone needs and is eager for, and it's free to them. So we're doing them a service. So when we, from the SUNY system, the Cal State University system came on board, and we're supporting it. So we have the East Coast, West Coast, support, and then Foothill De Anza Community College. Now we have Penn State, Drexel University, and then we've had lots of vendor partners and so forth. But what she and some other colleagues originally started as this kind of seed idea for an internal resource at SUNY has now grown into a resource that we have over 6,000 registered users from over 70 countries. Wow. And all of those folks they come from 1,600 different institutions. So K-12 schools, school districts, higher ed, so private, public, community colleges. So that's part of the power of Lisa's enthusiasm and community leadership and willingness to take action on that enthusiasm. So really building that, it's contagious, and we like to call all of our supporters flex space friends because they are. We're like you're a flex space friend. Really trying to share our message and bring the resource to more and more thousands of people.
So I don't know, maybe you're the appropriate person to ask, but I want to unpack the problem because the people who are going to be listening to this are definitely from our circle, from the higher education circle, the ed tech circle, but it's also going to reach an awful lot of people out there who have no idea why learning spaces are important or thinking about them, right? Even and I admit this, when you and I first started talking, there were a lot of dominoes that tumbled when I started thinking, wow, this is actually something to think about. So can we just take 2 minutes to unpack? For example, my children have been lucky enough to go to school in several different countries. It's just because of the lifestyle that my family has. And I've seen the difference between going to school in Hungary, to going to school in Thailand, to going to school now in Mexico, to going to school in the United States, which is where I grew up. And the effect of, wow, this classroom, this facility is really designed for learning, or gosh, this doesn't look so. Can you speak to the importance of the space that you're learning in and why this is a thing?
I think I'm going to defer to you from the pedagogy perspective, and then I will jump back in from an administrative perspective.
Yeah, I'll say a few things. So, what you just said is the space influencing the learning. And so to start with, begin with the end in mind. Mm-hmm. What are the learning outcomes? What are the learning activities that you want to be supporting? So when it was assumed that there's the expert teacher in front of the room projecting their knowledge to the students, you had a space that supported that learning style.
Sure.
Learning, I don't want to call style, learning experience.
Well done. I have lots of questions. I've had lots of
not learning styles.
I've had lots of debates around
styles.
that.
No, not learning styles. Learning experience, right? The instructional strategy of that. So it is now. It goes back to the Montessori, the Montessori perspective and approach, and also there's a K-12 or early childhood learning called Reggio Emilio.
Oh yeah, we know.
Okay, yes. Sure. And so the idea is that the space is the third teacher. And so you are, as a learner, the space is conveying messages about, what kind of behaviors are expected, allowed, are you supposed to engage in the environment with your peers, with the content, with, instructors and so forth. So there is research out there that has shown that an active learning approach where the student is moving around, talking, active learning is loud. It's not, the students are silent. So that kind of learning approach is more effective for student engagement, enjoyment, and learning, and wanting to be in the space, and so wanting to be in that environment. So how do we create spaces that enable those kinds of interactive, engaging learning experiences? So that's why the space matters, because it conveys the expectation, it supports what's allowed to occur in the space, what is enabled to occur in the space. If you can move around and be in small groups and discussing like this instead of all chairs in a row facing away from each other. So to enable us to be able to talk, to have writing space, to put materials out, to move around and have somewhere to record your conversation on whiteboards or paper or whatever it may be. It can be low tech,
Sure.
but so just thinking about those kinds of spaces that enable the activities that you want to happen in the space. So the idea with designing spaces is start with the verbs. What do you want to be? What is happening? What are you doing in the space? And then how does the space enable that? And then how does technology enable that?
And so how does this play out from an administrative perspective? Because I'm just thinking about, I'm going to date myself here, right? 40 years ago, when I was in elementary and middle school and those kinds of things, it was chairs in a square room. There was a desk in the front for the teacher. There was a chalkboard. How do you transform those buildings into active learning spaces? How do you have that conversation in a global or in a large ecosystem like a national school system? Is it just district by district, individual school by individual school, or is there a bigger wave that happens there administratively speaking?
Well, even though we were absolutely thrilled when ISTE came to us and said, can we participate in Flex Space as well, because it was designed initially for higher learning or higher education, I should say, rather. And at the time, if you go back 10 years, our chancellor at that time was Nancy Zimpher. Okay. And she launched, in fact, I saw something come up on your screen there about Open SUNY.
Right.
And her philosophy was about opening up SUNY and creating a pipeline that enabled support from preschool all the way through adult learning.
Sure, okay.
So, and I think that's been a wave that's gone quite a ways in the last 10 years, and we're certainly paying more attention to that. But administratively, when you think about, remember the good old days when you wanted to go see what was going on in another school and you would take a road trip to that school?
Yeah, sure.
Well, little by little, we don't have the resources to do that. So just by creating a repository that is detailed enough, we're saving a lot of time, money, and effort just to do the research and begin to benchmark, all right, this is what a school that we aspire to be more like. This is what they're doing. Let's see what their rooms look like. Let's see how we can implement some of those spaces. I'm forgetting the first part of your question that I wanted to circle back to.
Ultimately, I was just asking about how have we seen the space revolution or evolution unfold? Or is that even a question? Is that even a thing? Is it just logical that as education is evolving and understanding the design of education is, so must the space?
Just let me the University of Minnesota is
that's
one
where
of
I was going.
That's
cool. All right.
I
don't think of Boise or Bozeman as the most innovative, but maybe that's just me.
No, Minnesota.
Sorry.
University of Minnesota.
Sorry, Minnesota and Montana. My fault.
It has a beautiful building there called Brunick's Hall, and it is all active learning spaces as well as student services, kind of a one-stop shop for a lot of different activity there. And fortunately, they had some good researchers there as well that were able to capture a lot of data, and to Rebecca's point earlier, be able to demonstrate that some good learning was taking place and certainly better retention in those spaces. And the tile of the scale-up rooms with Bob and
North Carolina State University. I was just going to say, I think it started when you said how are spaces transforming, or how has that evolution occurred? I think that in the beginning it was this novelty, like, ooh, active learning. Let's explore that.
Right.
And then different universities were creating. They might have called them experimental classrooms. At San Diego State, we called it the Learning Research Studio. Mm-hmm. So it was this little niche kind of room that would support active learning that was kind of a novelty, and then a new approach, innovative approach, and then at the time, you maybe would get a handful of enthusiastic faculty who wanted to try to teach in that new way, and they would go into the space and so forth. So I feel like fast forward today, it's sort of kind of like a known thing that active learning be better. I don't want to say it's better than everything. So anyway, so that's kind of like the known entity. Now, how can we make it happen? And granted, you can do active learning in a classroom that wasn't built for active learning.
Is it? I guess that's really that's
just
where
I was
my
going to go.
that's where my question was, because you think of, I mean, I can redesign a lesson plan. I can redesign, a semester of content, but to re-architect a building, we're talking years. We're talking.
Yes.
You've got to move earth. You've got to build, break walls, these kinds of things. And so that's kind of where my head was like, do you start by just taking those rectangle rooms and then rethinking how that space is used as that more evolutionary process happens, new buildings are going up and those kinds of things, or does it matter?
I also teach a little bit, and if I am not an engaging instructor in a standard classroom, I'm not going to be a very engaging instructor in an active learning environment. There is professional, and professional development is very useful to understand how to use certain tools of the trade, so to speak, to foster that engagement with the students. And I really don't think you need loads and loads and loads of technology for institutions to go out and spend millions and millions and millions of dollars building new buildings. But it helps if you can move the furniture around.
Sure.
If it swivels and we can talk easily, and like I said, writing surfaces. That's what students really want, a place to either put materials or their laptop or some sort of so that's where I guess maybe you would. I really don't know the answer to how has it evolved and tracked, but I would assume that it's going to, the low-hanging fruit are the rectangular rooms that you can remove the furniture and put new flexible furniture in there. The next phase is removing the columns or changing it.
Well, I remember when I was in elementary, like the elementary school that I went to still exists. And I know that many of the rooms were divided with those rolling walls. And so opening those, like I'm sorry if I've taken this down a rabbit hole, but it's a little unexpected, but it's just, I'm the innocent that's come to this conversation. It's really fascinating to me to think about from the elementary to the adult learner scenario, how that space really influences what we're doing. And do we find in the research that I can see how like Montessori and Emilio Reggio are really effective in those young learners?
Yeah.
Because that's what they're used to. Do we see that in adult learners as well, where the ability to move around and have those open spaces and just differently designed, is it really increasing the effectiveness of learning as well?
I cannot point to specific research on it, but I think the idea is that, I bet there is research on it. I can't point to it.
Sure.
But in one of the tools that FlexSpace likes to partner with and talk about is the Learning Space rating system. It's sort of a rubric with many dimensions that are quality elements within a space design that would say, okay, these quality elements are likely to support active learning and other kind of modes of learning. So some of those elements are, you're talking about the adult learner, would be things like natural light, visual incorporating nature into the space, movement, enough like being able to move around, places to write. I think keep emphasizing that, whiteboards or whatever it may be, writing surfaces and so forth. So I think the ability to have some tactile writing, movement, and so forth is sort of the equivalent to those early childhood experiences. I mean, you're not just sitting there, you're maybe moving your body. And one of the other elements in the LSRS is inclusive design elements, and they break that down into physical accessibility, inclusivity, cognitive inclusion, and cultural inclusion. So the cognitive inclusion element is thinking about people that, everybody is probably somewhere on a spectrum of attention, focus, sensitivity to sensory and so forth, light and sound and so forth. So the idea is in spaces if you can provide options for students. So if you need to fidget in your seat, you can. If you want to swivel, if you can stand up, if you can walk around, if you can be in a quiet area or more of a loud collaborative space, if you can provide options, is another element to the design.
I don't want to downplay the utility of flex space, but really in the big picture, flex space is not particularly innovative per se. I mean, it's a database, and there's lots of pictures, and it's very well thought out. The taxonomies, the attributes that describe the rooms are there, and it's a resource that's available to people who really need to look at exemplars in order to brainstorm how they want to move forward. Now, the tool that we're offering more recently is the combination of the learning space rating system, as Rebecca just described. And we've built a model of integrated planning called the Flex Space Integrated Planning Pathway, or FLIP, which has nothing to do with flipping the classroom. But nonetheless, the concept is so many institutions have to deal with opportunity cost. Are we going to invest in new classrooms? Are we going to invest in more faculty? Are we going to invest in technology? They are tough choices. I have much more empathy now. And what we're saying is, look, let's take a problem that needs solving and define a scope and say, this is what we're going to measure. You go in, you don't even have to tie up professional staff for this. You can use students that are trained to go in and gather the data, make sure everyone's on the same page. You don't want any innovator reliability issues. And when they bring back that data from however the scope is, be it a department, a building, a school, or an entire university, you can say, okay, here are the rooms that are scoring very well. They have good learning potential. They have elements of biophilia in them, and they have mobile furniture and these types of things. There's enough plugs that people can plug into.
Unless most airports.
Right.
So you take all those scores and you put them in a master sheet and you just rank them from top to bottom. Already, the people that are supporting this research are going to be very happy with this, because now you've got some data to work with. And you can say, all right, let's draw a line at 80 and below. We really should invest in anything that is lower on the scale. But if you take your institutional research or your strategic enrollment plan, overlay that on top of their data, you can say, oh, look, we know that there's a lot of demand for these continuing education programs in this department and this department. And even though they already have some rooms that are well ranked, we think we should invest more resources into a high flex environment, a hybrid environment. So it's a very pragmatic approach. And what we're hearing anecdotally, which is really cool, is that, unfortunately, we're sort of going into these advisory groups often kind of looking out for the home team. And when everybody looks at that data and then everyone on that advisory group receives an account inside FlexSpace, you can go through, each individual can look at different spaces that appeal to their teaching style or to their particular curricular expertise. And they can move that into a shared idea board right inside the repository for that group to work with. Now you can take that idea board and start to have discussions, and that's where magic happens, because the faculty start to say, wait a minute, you're an engineering professor, I teach English, I never thought of doing that. I think I'd like to do that with my students. And the conversation starts to become refocused on the pedagogy. And then when the hard decisions are made about where those investments go, it was a very transparent process. It engenders trust, and everybody sort of understands how the decisions were made. So it's a nice, healthy way to make some of those investments and get your faculty to back the decisions.
Fantastic. I don't know if you just heard that they're going to close this room
I
in
did
5
hear
minutes.
that.
It's amazing how quickly 30 minutes goes, but I want to kind of sorry if you want to add to it,
No,
but then
no,
I
no,
want to
it's
give I want to give a plug for FlexSpace, because we haven't really been able to take, sort of go piecemeal into the actual application itself. Give me, and for everybody who's going to listen to this now and later, what do they need to do to participate? What do they need to do to sign up? What do they need to do to get it going?
Yes, absolutely. Go to flexspace.org.
Sweet. FLEX.
FLEX. Yeah, it's nothing crazy new. Yes, FLEX space, flexspace.org. And there's a tab on there that says portal login. So you click there, request an account. If you have a .edu email address, you will automatically be logged in and get access. If you have the reason is that when we created the database, there's a back end that was all the Carnegie classification database of universities. So that's in the back end. If you're one of those universities, it's going to be automatic. If you're in a K-12 or an international equivalent that's not EDU and not in the database yet, there might be a 1-day lag.
Okay.
But basically, if you have an academic affiliation, nonprofit, something of that nature, you will get access to it. So it's as easy as that. When you log in, you'll see it's very visually oriented. There are thumbnails of images, and then it's fully searchable. You can filter by the type of space you want to look at. If it's an active learning classroom, esports, high flex room, lecture hall, those kinds of things, media lab, chemistry lab.
Right.
You can filter on seating capacity. You can filter on the kind of institution if you're a private and you work with other privates, public, community college. And then within it, so you can search fields, and then you can also upload your own content. So that is the beauty of FlexSpace. It is all user-generated and user-contributed content.
Fantastic.
We do not create the content. We curate what is uploaded. So I want to encourage everybody to share and upload your spaces and examples, because there's anything from your campus, because the collection is only as good as the continued contributions from the community. So we're out there spreading the word, and you're spreading the word as a FlexSpace friend.
Nice.
And we want everybody to upload their examples and start sharing that way.
And of course, one of the questions that's asked along the way is, how are you folks funding this?
Yeah.
And we have a number of institutions that have contributed as thought leaders and provided some financial resources. We welcome sponsors. And the way we work with our sponsor community is they are partners with us. They're able to upload content, even though they don't have a .edu address. They're able to use that with their customer base and show different exemplars of perhaps their work that's in the repository. And also we find ways to curate collections. So if you're a company that's very invested in iFlex, for example, or microphones, these new beamforming microphones are awesome.
Oh, wow.
So we welcome people that want to come in and we can highlight whatever their products are. But we also understood from very early on that if a vendor came in and just scraped all of the user base, we'd be dead in the water, because it is forgive the term, a safe space that we can have these conversations as professionals amongst ourselves. We hope to be building in some new communication tools, because we're being rather forced to move from Drupal 7 to Drupal 9, of which I know nothing about other than I know we need to do it.
Yeah.
So we're working on a new portal, and we're welcoming ideas in particular from our sponsor community so we can better serve them so they can help us.
Fantastic. Lisa, Rebecca, thank you so much for being my final guest here on day one.
Thank you for the
Congratulations
invitation.
again on your award.
Thank you.
As a community
Very
organizer.
You're the celebrity.
I know.
I'm
we're in the presence of greatness here.
Yes, absolutely.
But I wish you a really great rest of the conference tomorrow and Friday, and then hopefully we'll stay in touch. We'll hear more about that.
We would be happy to join you anytime.
Awesome.
Thank you for making such a nice experience.
Awesome.